We're going to go ahead and get started in just 2 minutes. If I could ask everybody to take your seats. Thank you. Okay, everybody, we're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Michelle Medea with Second Nature, and just some logistics announcements. For these next 2 plenary sessions, we're going to be live streaming them on our YouTube channel. And if you check your email, we did send you all a link so that you can share them with your networks. And so just keep in mind that it's not just us in the room. There are lots of other folks watching here today as well. For those of you who are watching the broadcast, if you have any questions during the live stream, please send them to us at asmith@secondnature.org. So we're going to go ahead and get started with this next session. About a year ago, Pittsburgh was thrust into the spotlight when President Trump used his representation of Pittsburgh and not Paris as an excuse to withdraw from the Paris Climate Accord. Pittsburgh, and especially Mayor Peduto, was having none of it. The mayor assured the world that the city of Pittsburgh would continue to, quote, follow the guidelines of the Paris Agreement for our people, our economy, and our future. And that's what they've been doing. By working collaboratively across sectors, Pittsburgh is making tremendous advances in climate action. In many respects, this next panel really embodies the theme of this conference. In this session, we'll hear about why this cross-sector collaboration is important. We'll understand the challenges with implementation of climate solutions at a city scale. We'll hear about Pittsburgh's lessons learned with the planning process, learn how to leverage higher education strengths, and discuss the role of local funders in driving support. Joining us today are Mayor Bill Peduto, Andrew McElwaine, Vice President for Sustainability and Senior Program Director of the Heinz Foundation, Joylette Portlock, Executive Director of Communitopia, and our moderator, David Finegold, President of Chatham University. So I grew up in Pittsburgh. I live just outside of Washington, D.C. now, but Pittsburgh is home. So you have to indulge me for just a minute to talk about the city that I love. So in addition to world-class universities and hospitals, which everybody knows about, and just about the nicest people you will ever meet, Pittsburgh has been ranked as the most livable city in the U.S., the best place to retire, despite the weather, it's true, the best food city, #1 city that appeals to millennials, one of the top cities for young families, the best city for taking a hike, with 18 trails per 1,000 residents, and of course, the 6-time Super Bowl winning Pittsburgh Steelers, who remain the best franchise in football history. So, go Steelers. David Finegold, I'll turn it over to you now. Thank you. Take a girl out of Pittsburgh, but you can't.
Well, that was not the intro I was expecting, but it's great. Having suffered through the Super Bowl viewing party, I can say there's few things that would get all of Pittsburgh pulling for Philadelphia other than playing New England. So that was a great event. So what we're going to do to try to maximize the interaction of this is first have the mayor kick it off with giving you just a quick history of the journey, the sustainability journey that Pittsburgh's had. Then we're going to have some discussion among ourselves about some of these key questions for the panel. And then we're going to open up to you for questions and hopefully folks out there who may have questions for us. So, Mr. Mayor, if you'd kick it off and just tell us a little bit about where Pittsburgh's come and where it's heading.
Sure. Thanks, David, and thanks for having us here. That was the perfect introduction, by the way. You know, Pittsburgh has been described as America's resilient city, and that's because along our journey we've had many challenges. Back in the 19th century, our city, like so many others, burned to the ground. And we rebuilt it, and in the process, we built out an industrial giant that would go on to change the world. People like Carnegie, Mellon, Westinghouse, Frick, and others were the industry's giants that built upon the rivers an entirely new industrial revolution. And in that process, we created challenges again, challenges of air that was dangerous to breathe, water that was poisonous to drink, and the greatest disparity between the haves and the have-nots in American history. And we did what Pittsburghers did. We rolled up our sleeves. We created the first Clean Air Act in American history. We went with a courageous young woman from Chatham College marching up the steps of Congress to talk about toxins in our water, Rachel Carson. We had the ability to organize in our mines and our mills, and we not only built the United States, but we built the middle class. And things went along pretty well, and then we had economic collapse in 1979. Pirates won the World Series. It's been a long time. Steelers won their 4th Super Bowl, and Pittsburgh died. We literally died. Our economic collapse is the greatest in American history, greater than during the Great Depression. And over the 20 to 30 years of that time period, we understood something very valuable, that though we were very proud of our past was not dictating our future. And we broke into a new economy, an economy based on eds and meds, an economy based on science and technology, and in the process continued the gains that we had reached in being leaders in sustainability. Although our air quality is not where we want it to be, and our water quality certainly has more that we can do, we've traveled further than any other city, and we've shown the example that if you can do it in Pittsburgh, you can do it anywhere.
Great. Just to follow up on that, you know, one of the things, and I think the newbie to Pittsburgh in the group, so I've only been there for just over 18 months, but what's really striking when you get there compared to, you know, Boston, New York, New Jersey, California, where I've lived, is how well all of the actors seem to have cooperated to lead this renaissance. What do you attribute that to? What do you think it is that enables Pittsburgh to come together, and what lessons are there for others out there, other cities, other regions, to think about how they can cooperate in those
I think there's two options that happen when you go through what Pittsburgh went through in the 80s and the 90s. You either sit at the table and you fight for every crumb, or you find a way to put away differences and you work together. So during the 80s and the 90s, when we were dying, the foundation community was doubling down in the arts and in culture and making sure that our symphony not only left, but new halls were being built. The Warhol Museum, the Carnegie Science Center, the Children's Museum. We didn't lose our critical assets, we built upon them. And then at that same time, we put away our labor and corporate strife and found ways to sit around the table. We ended the arguments that we had when we fought for the last mill in the city, where the Sierra Club and the steelworkers went to war, and we created the Blue-Green Alliance, where we are looking at ways where energy opportunities can benefit workers as well. If we're going to build and put in turbines, let's use American steel to do it. And we found ways to work together across government, across our large institution, especially our town gown issues, and within that same infrastructure of nonprofits, the large nonprofits actually reaching out and pulling up the smaller nonprofits. It's amazing what happens when you get knocked down to your knees. And it shouldn't have to take that for that type of cooperation to happen, but it did.
Right. Andrew, you started sort of the Heinz focus on sustainability, then left and worked in nonprofits and government, then you came back to Pittsburgh now to lead those efforts further. What do you see, as you've been around the country but there, that makes it distinctive in terms of why the actors cooperate? So,
Pittsburgh has a unique history of multi-sector collaboration, and I think the mayor's point is very well taken, that, you know, we put aside the terrific labor management strife, and it took a lot to make that happen, but there is a history there of working together. You go back to another great mayor of Pittsburgh, David Lawrence, pulling together the business community, pulling together labor when Pittsburgh was choking to death on pollution in 1946-47. and creating that first renaissance, and Mayor Caligiuri doing it again during the period that Mayor Peduto described, and now again Mayor Peduto creating that same set of initiatives cross-sectorally, 3 really outstanding mayors who saved our city and have made it possible to move forward. And it's that kind of public sector leadership that is essential. Second, the foundation community has been active in Pittsburgh and supportive of these efforts. And we have been particularly investing in an area of activity called P4.
Yep.
And everything in Pittsburgh has to have a P, Penguins, Pirates. P4 stands for People, Planet, Place, and Performance. And those are 4 categories by which we measure how Pittsburgh is doing against the health and well-being of its people, its overall economic performance, the health and well-being of the planet, and placemaking, particularly in terms of places that have been bypassed by economic renewal in our community. And we have convened a whole team of people to create a dozen metrics. Those of you who remember Seattle's sustainability measures may remember they had 120 or something. We have 12, and 12 is plenty. And those are in the process now of being implemented across the city. And in particular, they're going to be used to evaluate investment in redevelopment in our community. So those 12 metrics will be there, and to trigger public subsidy, and still about 2/3 of economic development in the city has some measure of a tax abatement or a grant or a tax credit associated with it. To get those, you're going to be measured against those 12 metrics and performance so that we can continue to build on the momentum that's been started in Pittsburgh.
Now, Joylette, you in a way embody this cross-sector divide. She is a true Renaissance woman, so in addition to being the founder and leader of Communitopia, which is a leading communication firm for sustainability, she's just taking a new position with the Carnegie Natural History Museum to lead the science and research behind their effort on the Anthropocene. She's on the Allegheny County Health Board, and I just learned that in her free time, which obviously there can't be much of, she helped found the Creatives for Climate. So you in one person embody all this cross-sectoral cooperation, but what is it that you see as sort of the secret sauce in Pittsburgh that makes this cooperation work?
Right. Yeah, I wear a lot of hats, but I think that what's just been touched on is really important. Pittsburgh is a story of continual community reinvestment, both on the part of the foundation community. The higher education institutions play a very important role in bringing new energy and innovation to the region. I think that perhaps the best characterization beyond our superior sports teams of what makes Pittsburgh great the best way I've heard it put is that Pittsburgh is the kind of place that you can't really live as a tourist. There are a lot of, I think, cities where you can come and you can experience the city, but for Pittsburgh to open itself to you, and I've been there for about 10 years, the benefits really come from investing. It has a very strong sense of place, and there's a very strong ethic towards making that place better. So of all the efforts that I'm involved in, I think that what's really exciting to me is to see all of the different ways in which groups of people are starting to convene, in which the city is convening groups of stakeholders, in which the nonprofit community is convening groups of people to work across sectors. So that's within the environmental organizations. That's, as you mentioned, the Creatives for Climate initiative, which pairs kind of science communicators with artists. That's happening at the Natural History Museum around the different ways that we can promote this idea of how do we frame this era in which we now live for people as kind of and create a framework for people to understand all the ways that humans are having impact. And that, comes into play with my work at Communitopia, which I've talked with several of you about, which we focus on climate change communication, and from the idea that we are going to have to expand the range of things that people feel about climate change beyond fear and guilt, that we really need to be focusing on these aspirational goals of what is the world that we're trying to build and how can we build community around that. Because for many people, thinking about climate change is a very isolated feeling. Even people who care about it just kind of sit in their world of their little, I can't tell you the number of people who've come up to me and said, oh, I do care about climate change, but I still drive an SUV, or, I still eat meat. There's a lot of guilt around our individual actions, and I think we need to elevate that discussion, and our work at Communitopia tries to do this, both with our online series about climate change, as well as an on-the-ground event we do called Future Fest. Try to elevate that discussion to help people understand that it really is there are systems approaches that need changing, that as much as individual actions matter, we really need to be connecting and communicating, because humans are inherently social creatures, and we've gotten away from that. But I think we need to have an increased understanding that if everything great that people do and have done, likewise with everything kind of terrible that we've done, has come from collective action. If we don't start talking as a public, as decision makers, as stakeholders in the community, we're not going to be able to move the ball. We've got to do that. We have some very important goals that we need to accomplish, and I think Pittsburgh is starting to do that well.
Yeah, I'd just point to a couple of other things that, just as a fair newcomer to it, have really struck me that make the cooperation work and are very distinctive. I think one thing about it is, people around the country, they talk about 6 degrees of separation. I mean, it's pretty clear to me in Pittsburgh it's 2 degrees, right? It's often referred to as either the biggest small town or the smallest big city in America. And I think the fact that so quickly you can get to whoever you need for a particular issue or problem, but also that sort of hangs over everything. So people recognize that if they're a bad actor, people quickly get to know it. And so there's that social capital that I think is built up that you feel really powerfully. And the other thing that was really striking coming from the higher ed sector is, I've spent a lot of time in Boston. It's a great higher ed city. I don't think the country or the world necessarily appreciates how much of a higher ed city Pittsburgh is. The fact you can get on your bike at Chatham and ride by 8 different higher ed colleges and universities in 20 minutes. And the fact that they're also very distinctive. So you have Pitt with this massive influence in the medical sciences. You have CMU leading the charge in new tech, robotics, AI. Chatham, a liberal arts, a sustainability-focused place. You have Duquesne, Carlow, religious institutions with strong social justice missions. So they can cooperate without feeling like they're in direct competition, which frankly, in most of the rest of higher ed I've seen, the neighbors, they don't necessarily get on so well, right? They see themselves as rivals. So I think those things are really assets too. To move on to the next question, so we've talked already in this a bit about the different roles these actors have played in the resurgence. As you think about the climate action plan, the way we're moving forward, can you talk a little bit about what you see as the distinctive roles that the actors play and how we're coping with these new sets of issues, challenges for us? Joylette, maybe you kick that one off and we'll go through.
Well, speaking from the nonprofit perspective, I think that the advocacy community obviously has a huge role to play in being that interface, with the public in a lot of ways on how to, build support, how to message, and how to help decision makers get the capital that they need to sort of change the script on some of this stuff. I think we're fortunate in that was the previous panel talking about the importance of leadership, as well as the importance of all of these other sectors really coming together. I think that that Pittsburgh is in a place where, when we start talking about how to implement these strategies that are coming up through the climate action plan, we've talked yesterday about the work being done around drawdown. When you start trying to figure out how to actually figure out what you're going to do and then how to put that into place, it kind of feels like spaghetti at the beginning, just kind of spaghetti everywhere. There's so many ideas and there's so many different stakeholders. But what I really see happening in our region is that there are groups of people, these coalition efforts across sectors that are being built up, and it's starting to feel like the spaghetti's in a bowl now. I don't know if you if that metaphor's doing anything for you guys, but I feel like we've got a bowl now, at least, to put the spaghetti in.
Which is a lot less messy than
right,
not
it's
having
a lot less messy, and it's starting to feel like it's tractable, that we might actually get there. So.
Yeah. Mr. Mayor, what do you see in terms of?
I agree. I mean, you start to look at these goals and metrics that seem unattainable, but if you benchmark them and the progress that you're making, you realize that you have progress and that you're actually able to meet them. So the goal of government's twofold. The first goal of government's to set lofty goals, to be able to say, this is what we're going to do internally, in order for people to be able to see, yes, you can do the same thing in your home, in your neighborhood, within your organization. So when you look at something like a 150-0 plan, in order to be able to get to 100% renewable, cut energy use and water use by 50%, and get to zero waste, you have to have benchmarks along the way to be able to do it as a government. But you're not doing it for the individual or for the greater community. You're empowering them. Your job is to empower others to do the job. And with our universities, they are the urban labs of making that happen. Universities can excel the process. They can put the research behind it. They can partner with cities. We were the first city to go into a memorandum of understanding, a written agreement with Carnegie Mellon University that allowed the university to become my research and development branch. And in return, we gave them access to the public right-of-ways to make our city an urban lab. And what that did, same thing as patching a pothole. If I wanted the smartest traffic signals in the world, I didn't have to put out an RFP and going with the lowest bid. I could pick up the phone, call Carnegie Mellon and say, can your folks start to work on this program? And what it did was created an ecosystem of innovation within the city. Those same principles can be applied to sustainability, because the world's in an economic competition right now for the best ideas. And governments can help to empower universities, individuals, groups to do more. When you spoke earlier about how it's moving beyond, into the individual, into the community, Pittsburgh went through a Renaissance 1 and a Renaissance 2, and much of that was based on brick and mortar and bridges and tunnels and skyscrapers. But the Renaissance movement was followed by the humanist movement. And I think that's where we're at right now. We're looking at the individual, making sure that those that are left behind have a bridge to be able not to be left behind, in centering those actions around the community and the individual, much in the same way they did many years ago.
Andrew, can you talk about, the role, obviously the foundations have been front and center in this. I think the fact that thanks to a century ago's wealth, Pittsburgh is so well endowed with these foundations, not just the Heinz endowments, but the others, and how they've come together and are thinking about this.
Well, an example is a number of years ago, a previous administration wanted to put yet another steel mill on top of where the last steel mill in town had been, as well as the city's tow lot, where they would impound cars. And this was beautiful riverfront property that really deserved a better fate. So the foundations came together and beat the city out for the property. And it's now going to be Carnegie Mellon's Advanced Robotics and Manufacturing facility, which is going to be built inside the old steel mill itself. They're going to keep the shell of the steel mill and put their robotics manufacturing facility inside of it. Beautiful space. And it's the future of a neglected neighborhood, Hazelwood, which has tremendous future opportunity. And so the foundations are able to step in at times and do things that, it's not unique to Pittsburgh. If you look at Cincinnati, you'll see the corporate community does this in Cincinnati. The Over the Rhine neighborhood is worth looking at for some similar activities where the corporate sector stepped in. But Pittsburgh foundations are able to move in at a neighborhood scale and try to encourage redevelopment in ways that doesn't also encourage displacement. And that's one of our challenges right now is, can we, as the city revitalizes, as neighborhoods that have been marginalized become desirable again, can the people who live there now benefit from that redevelopment. And that's an experiment that's in process as we speak. Or will they end up having to be pushed out into marginalized neighborhoods elsewhere in the region? We're seeing a lot of movement of people back and forth between the eastern suburbs and the city as development takes place, and that's an area we really need to watch. So, but I think the mayor's spot on. It's that individual now is how can the city's how can all the residents of the city benefit from the redevelopment taking place?
And we're hoping that long-term vision of the foundations to preserve that might be one of the cards to play in this Amazon competition, right? Because that's certainly a site that's been mentioned as a place.
So
where
one
they might
site
go.
has 175 acres. It was the last operating steel mill in the city, and now the last brownfield that's not fully reclaimed, or fully redeveloped rather. It has been reclaimed in the city. And so its future is very much tied to the future of the city and, of course, to that particular neighborhood.
So
Let me just
yeah,
hit
please.
one thing, because I don't think a lot of people realize this. We have 4 foundations within our city with over $1 billion of endowments for a city of 310,000 people. And they fund almost solely efforts within Pittsburgh and Western Pennsylvania. We have more philanthropic wealth than any city without a person named Gates living in it.
And I can tell you as a university president, that's just an amazing asset to have those, and 4 very large ones, but also a large ecosystem below that, so much of that focused on the region. And
Yes.
so it's an incredible asset for us, and I think it's something that really has played a huge part in that redevelopment. I think one of the things they share with the foundations is the long-term outlook. So, you know, the Higher Education Climate Consortium was one of the first 4 partners in the city's climate action plan 1.0. Now we're at 3.0, and you know we're moving forward. But I think their commitment, you know, here to the president's climate commitment to go to net zero has been a big part of that resurgence, as well as cooperating with the surrounding communities. Andrew, you had sort of touched on the issue of the challenges, some of what we're facing with inequality, displacement. Can you talk about in this journey what you've seen as some of the biggest challenges we've had to face and what we still face in trying to move this forward?
The city is doing the best it's done in the last 40 years, and it's a different city from the city I knew 30, 40 years ago, and it's wonderful to see happen. And the mayor's climate leadership has been tremendous. Our challenge going forward is to take the good things that are happening in the city and make it a regional and wide effort. And our region, you know, once you get outside of Pittsburgh, we are kind of in, some former coal communities, regions that have really struggled to recover from the loss of the fossil fuel industry. At the same time, we have a new fossil fuel industry coming in, promising to bring it all back again in terms of our Marcellus shale development. Proposals to replace the Rust Belt with a so-called plastics belt stretching from Pittsburgh to eastern Kentucky to refine natural gas liquids into plastic products at a time when our oceans are choking on plastics. So there's some real challenges, and with all the good happening in Pittsburgh, one of the things I'd like to see is it expand out in our region. And to do that, it's not just going to be climate action and not just going to be environmental action. It's going to require us to be able to offer people who live in southwestern Pennsylvania, northern West Virginia, southeast Ohio, offer them something else. The economy of these regions has been devastated, and so the kind of regrowth and redevelopment that Pittsburgh's seen needs to happen elsewhere as well.
Yeah, I think that's a very important point, and one that I think has applications not just for our region, but for many of the regions that have been, already mentioned, and I've had conversations with some of you about, how do we reinvest in these, not rural communities or communities that are, low income and have really struggled. I mean, the southwestern Pennsylvania has had an extractive economy for a long, long time. It was timber, then it was coal, then it was, steel. Now it's natural gas, and so it really is a difficult question of how do you bring a new vision for what the region can be to people who have spent generations assuming that a certain amount of pollution is just the price of economic prosperity. That the things go hand in hand. They're not separable, and you just accept them. And so I think that that's really what we're dealing with in a lot of southwestern Pennsylvania. And so I think that's a very important point, that there has to be some kind of strategy for how to invest in those communities so that the re-envisioning that is very thoughtfully and intelligently happening in Pittsburgh is something that that helps lift the region as a whole and really can expand out in a way that isn't putting the city further at odds with its surroundings, and really helps redefine what economic success in the region looks like. And so I think that I think investment is important, and I think that the important pieces of that are really giving people a sense that their voices matter, that their lives matter, that they are, not to turn a phrase, but that they are able to access these things in ways that they can actually achieve, right? Because I think that for a long time there have been a lot of voices shut out of the conversations, both within and outside of our cities.
Yeah. Mr. Mayor, anything to add on that?
So, 2016 election. I mean, that's all you have to do. You just have to look at it and see what happened in West Virginia, birthplace of progressive movement, the mine workers, the most progressive organization of organized labor, solid red, Burgundy, in fact, southwestern Pennsylvania, eastern Ohio, Michigan. What happened? How did all these areas that were solid blue turn red? And what happens within our cities at the same place where people see all of this new development occurring and they're saying, there's nothing for me. My family's never going to afford to live in that apartment building. I can't afford to go to that restaurant. There is an entire disconnect that's happening right now, and we're not recognizing it or addressing it properly. And that issue for us is based on a culture where smoke means progress. Smoke means progress even if you choke on it. It is part of generations of understanding that's where my future is. And now all of a sudden that's being taken away, and the easy answer is it's the environmentalists. It's not that coal has been outpriced by natural gas, it's regulations. And when we go in and say simply, we're going to retrain you how to code, we are being culturally deaf and insulting to those that we're trying to say we want to find a way to help. When we go in and we say, you are trained, you built this country, you're the ones whose backs made sure that there was prosperity for everyone across this country, and we're going to reinvest. What we need is in areas like West Virginia, an American Marshall Plan. We need an American Marshall Plan that invests dollars into creating wind turbines in this country, not Germany, using American steel, and you're going to build them. We're going to build solar panels, and we're going to produce them in eastern Ohio. They're not going to be produced in China. And in Michigan, you're going to assemble them, not in India. And you're going to have a chance to be a part with a future. You're the people that built this country in the 19th century and in the 20th century, and you're going to build our future in the 21st. You want to turn a West Virginian into an environmentalist? Give them a job.
So one last quick question, and then we'll throw it open to the audience. So I think a big theme of the whole conference has been, in the absence of federal leadership on these issues, what can we do within our place, within our city, to move these things forward? So if you would say, what do you see as the one or two big things that we can do in Pittsburgh, or that any city can take on to move this when we're not going to see a lot of tailwinds from DC for a while on it? Andrew?
There's a wonderful book out by Bruce Katz and Jeremy Nowak called The New Localism from the Brookings Institution, literally out 10 days ago. And no surprise, Mayor Peduto's mentioned in it, as is Pittsburgh. And it's really how local leadership can fill for the federal government for the next several years. And some real tangible examples, not just Pittsburgh, but Indianapolis and elsewhere. And so I really encourage you to take a look at that and the work coming out of the Brookings Metropolitan Initiative, because cities are going to have to lead. Pittsburgh is leading, and that's where we have to look to for the time being.
This is simple. Be the change you wish to see in the world, right? just get out there and do it, and put on the blinders about everything that's being talked about in Washington. It matters, but it doesn't matter as much as what you can do on a local level. And then network. Being here, being with others, working through your city governments and building those networks up, and then understand that true collaboration means cross-sector. So what are you doing to reach out to the faith-based community? What are you doing to reach out to labor? What are you doing to be able to reach out to other natural allies so that when you need your initiative to have the political muster to get passed at the local level, they'll be there for you and you'll be there for them when their issue comes up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And what are you doing to talk to some of these farther flung communities? What are you doing to make sure that the underrepresented communities in the city are, also at the table? I think that there's a very real disconnect between what people think about what will get them the things they want versus what the things are that they actually want. So it's not necessarily we need more coal mining, it's we need jobs and neighborhood community building, and those things can be separated, and we need to talk more aspirationally about where we're going, and we need to talk with everyone more aspirationally about where we need to be going. And I would just echo what I think the final message of the first panel yesterday was that, know your power, understand that we do all have a voice and a role to play here, and I think that Pittsburgh is certainly a place where that kind of possibility is very evident. Invest.
Yeah. And I have to say for Chatham, not just with the legacy of Rachel Carson, but as a place that's always been about empowering women, seeing that the combination of women's education and giving planned family planning could be the #1 solution to climate change that Paul Hawkins led was pretty impressive in terms of thinking about the difference we can make. So with the time remaining, let me throw it open to questions people in the audience may have or that may be viewing outside for the panelists. Yes.
Regarding the city's pension plan and things like that, retirement plan, and regarding the Heinz Foundation, have you aligned your investments to carbon reduction and such things?
Disinvestment from fossil fuels is part of our 2030 plan. Right now, with the representation within our pension board that is heavily union, and with the fracking industry employing heavily union positions, it's politically unattainable, but it remains as part of our 2030 goal that we publicly state we will reach.
Yeah, the Heinz endowments got rid of coal many years ago, and we're phasing out the rest.
Other questions? Yeah.
Hi, Maria Bocalandro from Dallas, Texas. We're a community college system, and we're working in southern Dallas and northern Ellis counties. We have a very big service area, and it's interesting how things that are happening in North Dallas, when we speak about sustainability, when we speak about green initiatives, sometimes we get pushback saying, oh, you can do that in the Flower Mounds and the Planos and the Friscos, but down here it's different. So we're located in a hub, a transportation hub, and you have to realize that all the cargo that goes from Canada to Mexico and back and forth is redistributed in southern Dallas, because we're between 35, 45, 20, and 30. So the natural trend is a logistic hub, and they're appearing all over. But we have a group of mayors saying we want people to live and play and work. That's like poetry. It's just not going to happen unless the community gets involved and says, this is what we want, because they're giving out all these permits, and they're just these huge logistic hubs with very few jobs, low paying. So how do we empower the community? How do we create a space, a safe space in a community college for them to have a voice and participate in the sustainable economic development of the region?
I think one great role that higher ed institutions can play is they're a neutral place in that way. So they, in addition to their education, their research, their outreach missions, they can be a convener of those groups to come together. And so, one thing we try to do a lot is be a place where these different actors can meet and discuss how they might come together. Other thoughts on how you can mobilize in that kind of situation?
Yeah, that was my first thought too, is to figure out who the stakeholders are and what the conversations that are needed are, and then figure out how to pull those people, how to pull those groups to the table, and start exploring possibilities.
I was in West Virginia a week ago having a very similar conversation with people there who were, looking at very limited economic opportunity throughout the region, and not wanting to leave to go where the jobs are, say, somewhere else in the country. And, how can foundations, how can people of goodwill help people who do not have voice get that voice? And it's a challenge. It requires organization, it requires resources, it requires some patience and time. It requires a lot of listening to what the people who live there have to say and what their wants and desires are. It requires building some political power and will. So it won't happen quickly. It will take time, but I would urge you to do it and to help give voice to those people who want a different economic future from the one that's being handed to them. And to help them reach a point where they can get their wishes and desires to the people making decisions about their future.
And I would just add that you heard a lot of the upside, the cooperation of Pittsburgh, but one of the other things that's striking when you come there is it is an area, the way it's divided by rivers and hills and whatnot, of extremely micro neighborhoods. And so I remember doing a meet and greet with some of our faculty, and one person introduced themselves as being in a mixed marriage because one was from the North Hills and one was from the South Hills of the city. And so those divisions you mentioned between North and South Dallas, Pittsburgh has that. I mean, it has people
it's
will
illegal
say,
to cross two rivers.
Yeah,
the same day.
And so even though things are much more compact, there is that sense that you have to overcome. But I think having a common purpose, bringing people together for that can do that. Tim, did you have?
I had a question just about scale. When you're a case study of Pittsburgh, but how have you found effective ways to scale this example across, and specifically Mayor Peduto, other cities, and how do you share that story effectively? And is there anything we could learn from that as a sector or as a cross-sectoral initiative?
Yeah, I think one of the things Andrew just said is very critical, is it doesn't happen overnight. When I talked about 1979 when Pittsburgh's economy finally collapsed, it was the same year that Carnegie Mellon created the first program in robotics. And by the mid-1980s, that created the first PhD in robotics and had been building out the field of artificial intelligence since the 1970s. And now we have this entire industry that's expanding greater than any other industry in our city in predictive analytics, artificial intelligence, and robotics. The biggest lesson is plant seeds. Don't expect the crops to be grown. You have to plant the seeds first. And understanding that it is going to take time. We have the example of showing the extreme. Most cities in this country are not facing 19% unemployment or having neighborhoods lose 70% of their population. We lost more people than New Orleans lost after Katrina during the 80s, but there was no federal bailout for us. So I guess the example that we can give is if we were able to overcome those types of situations and there was not a concrete path, there isn't like one father or mother that takes credit for this. It was organically organizations not giving up on the city and continually moving on forward. It's the exact thing I say to the folks I talk to in Detroit. It's not going to happen overnight. It's worth fighting for. Just keep taking a step forward and a step forward. And Detroit's very much like Pittsburgh, without the amount of universities in the center, but the University of Michigan up the road. And when I talk to President G at West Virginia, I tell him, don't imagine anything less than Morgantown being the Boulder of Pittsburgh. That's what West Virginia University should be, and we want to partner with you as well.
If I could just add to that, I think something that is nationally relevant and gets to that question as well as the previous question is that there's a really important power in getting together and building coalitions and finding shared goals that can be moved forward, in the power of one sector to advocate for another, in the power of one population to advocate for another's success, to really move things forward. So I think that certainly is something that is happening in Pittsburgh, but also happening in lots of places across the nation. And I think as it applies to climate action, is a really important tool.
I think one of the really positive things is the way in which, through the 100 Resilient Cities and others, those cities are coming together to share these things, to share lessons, what's working, right, and to move it forward at that local level.
We have one last question for the panel over here.
Judith Vermeulen, Portland State. The city of Portland is also trying to link itself much more effectively to the region, but also to the rest of Oregon, which sounds very much like your region. And so Portland State's put together something we're calling an Idea Lab to do this. I'm really interested in how you're actually connecting the dots. What kind of, do you have a structure you rely on? Is each project separately connected? How are you starting to link your efforts to the region as well?
Wow. Well, just a few. I mean, and we all partner on these. The 2030 district is a model that we have that's based on the buildings, looking at reducing the amount of energy in the buildings, the amount of water use in the overall carbon footprint. And we partner together not only to create an area of our downtown, where we also partner with the corporate community, but also within our university area as well, becoming the only city in the country that has 2 major districts that are both a part of it. We've started initiatives not only with Carnegie Mellon, but with the University of Pittsburgh to begin the development of micro districts and being able to provide micro energy, looking at partnerships with the foundation community to develop a 100% renewable district, partnering with other industries on doing cogeneration. And we have created a partnership with the Department of Energy to allow a whole series of models to be able to be implemented simultaneously within the city. Those are just 2 that come to mind that are very concrete examples of where our ability to lower our carbon footprint through collaboration has been very successful.
Pittsburgh is a unique city in terms of its civic engagement and the willingness of people to participate in the civic process to a great extent. And one of the things I love about it are there's a large number of initiatives that take place across the city, some of them duplicative, some of them overlapping, and we're okay with that.
2 degrees of separation.
It doesn't all have to be one. And some of them work out, some of them maybe don't so well. A professor now at the University of Toronto, Richard Florida, was very critical of it years ago. He called it the layer cake effect, where we have all these different institutions piled up on top of each other like sedimentary rock over the generations. But it's the Pittsburgh way. And it's part of being a more intimate city and a very engaged city that really is a huge part of why it's survived and been so resilient. But it's messy at times, but there's a stick-to-itness in the city that I admire so much. But I won't say it's all as neat and tidy. There's just a lot of different initiatives, a lot of people working, maybe once in a while at cross purposes, but there's enough goodwill in the city to minimize that friction.
And I would just add to that, I think the question also included, outreach into the larger region and how those connections are going. I honestly feel like a lot of those kinds of partnerships are pretty nascent, that they're starting to be built now. We're starting to, I think there's a new recognition of how important those conversations really are going to be. How successful is Pittsburgh, the city, going to be at reducing pollution if we have petrochemical build-outs happening in neighboring counties, if we have, the continuation of the natural gas expansion in the region. And so there's, I think, a bigger interest, and I'm involved in some of the efforts to sort of get the community groups in those communities talking to each other and talking with people who are interested in furthering environmental goals as well. But I would say that those are more nascent.
Although, I think one body we haven't referred to yet that's been a big actor in this is something called the Allegheny Conference, where industry, government, higher ed, nonprofits all do come together. They haven't necessarily been the leader on the sustainability side, but I think they have been a voice in the resurgence of the city where people could deal with common problems. And then on the micro level, for the universities, engaging with the communities is something our students want to do, our faculty want to do. At Chatham, we happen to be sort of right where the redevelopment of Pittsburgh has stopped, and so we're on the border of some neighborhoods that have really been hard hit and are still looking to recover, and engaging with them has been something that we view as really core to our mission. We have one great example, just to build on the amazing high schoolers we heard from yesterday. So one of our students partnered with a nonprofit, 412 Rescue, to come up with an app that enabled all of the food being produced at our university, that when it would, instead of being put into landfill or thrown out, that it now goes directly to the people who need it in the city. That worked so well. CMU, Pitt adopted the same model, and so this is all now happening in a very decentralized way. So it's just a micro example of how you can get these actors coming together and solving really important local problems. So I think we are out of time, so I would just ask everybody, if you could, to join me in thanking our panelists.
Thank you very much. Thanks to all of you for coming from Pittsburgh. And we're going to take a quick break. You're going to move into your concurrent sessions now, and please be back in here at 12:15 for lunch. Thank you.